Hello, everyone, and welcome to At Barrons. I'm Andy Serwer, and welcome to our guest, Thomas Flohr, who is the chairman and founder of Vista. Thomas, great to see you.
Great to see you. Happy to be here.
So I want to ask you about your company, of course, which is the owner of VistaJet. Tell us about VistaJet and the various other businesses that you have.
Well, look, I got into business aviation really by being a quite frustrated client of this industry, and that was about 21 years ago. And what I saw was it was actually either a random charter opportunity where we wouldn't know what you get until you arrive at the airport, or otherwise you had to buy a full airplane or a fraction of an airplane, and all that kind of like wasn't intuitively making sense to me. I just wanted to fly, but I wanted to make sure that I get exactly what I know and what I understand as a product. And think about any other industry, right? Any hotel industry at the very top end, the presidential suite. I mean, you're making a decision for $10,000, $15,000, and you would make it absolutely sure that you know what you're getting and the quality of the product and so on and so forth. In this industry, unless you owned a full airplane, you wouldn't know what you get, and that didn't make any sense to me. And you're selling to the wealthiest and most influential people. So that's what Vista came about, and I said, okay, why don't we build a fleet of absolutely identical airplanes all around the world and give clients access to it with a simple subscription program.
Right. And so what kind of jets do you fly, and how many aircraft do you have at this point, Thomas?
So today we have about 230 aircraft. We're focusing mainly on what is called super mid and ultra long range airplanes. That would be Challenger 350 from Bombardier or Global 7500 from Bombardier. The fleet is mainly Bombardier product, but we also have other manufacturers. And it's a freely floating fleet around the world. So these 230 airplanes, they don't have a home base. And I think that's the other invention that we started at Vista some 20 years ago. Because for me, it never made sense that an airplane has to have a home base. Because it should be flying to a city, picking up the next client, and finding another client in the city of destination, and like that, freely floating around the world.
The 230 aircraft, how does that stack up against NetJets, which I guess is a competitor of yours here in the United States, or globally as well, right?
Yeah, sure. So NetJets is focusing in their entire fleet. So they're bigger, they have more airplanes, but most of the fleet, if you do the count, is on smaller aircraft. Smaller aircraft is like maybe airplanes with 2 or 3 hours of range. And then at the top end, of course, they have a fair amount of airplanes, especially in the United States. But when it comes to the global coverage, no company covers the globe like we do on all 5 continents. So we're in Europe, we're in the Middle East, we're in Asia, we're in Africa, we're in Australia. And I thought when I started Vista that you really need to cover the entire globe. Because if any product should get you anywhere, it is business jets. And you got to make sure that you can, as easily as owning an airplane, get to Japan, get to Australia, without this evil word of empty leg of having to pay for the plane to go back to the original destination. And I saw that as a very much an inefficient part of this industry, that very often planes fly empty back to their original country of origin. And that, of course, we could only resolve by having clients all around the world. So think about it, we're flying from here to Japan, and if this plane needs to fly empty back to the United States, that's a waste.
But how do you mitigate against that?
Well, by having a client base in Japan. So once this plane from America lands in Japan, we would most likely have a client in Japan that might need to go to Mumbai. So maybe we don't have a client in Mumbai, but we have one in Delhi. So then from Delhi, it might fly to Abu Dhabi. And it is like that these 230 aircraft are floating freely around the globe, and hence driving a lot of efficiency on utilization, and that allows us to offer a price point which is more competitive.
Are your customers corporate or high net worth individuals, or both?
That's a very, very good question. I would say it's about 80-20 corporate versus ultra high net worth individuals, with the one reserve I would like to make, and this is that ultra high net worth individuals very often have a stake in a company, and therefore, in today's life where you work 7 days a week, all year round, very often there is a crossover at the very top end.
And security must be a big concern for your customers. How do you integrate their security needs with your business?
Well, there's safety and security, especially when you run a global company like ours with, we're flying to 196 countries per year, so sometimes very remote destinations. So we're working very much with the authorities, obviously, in the country we're flying to. We're working with world compliance, so there's different companies that provide us for every single flight enough information for us to judge whether it's safe to fly to this country or not. And that is being presented to the client. If there were the slightest concerns, then we would communicate this with the client. However, if we feel and would deem it not safe, we would not fly, even if the client would insist.
So let me ask you about the nitty-gritty of the actual subscription. I want to become a customer. How much do I have to spend? How many years do I have to sign up for, et cetera?
So it's typically a 3-year contract. But what we do different than anybody else is we're not saying you have to buy a quarter of an airplane or an eighth of an airplane. We're just learn what flight profile you have, and we would offer you exactly the number of hours that you need. You might need per year 135 hours. So why do I need to sell you 100 or 200? I'll offer you 135. And then we would tailor it really to the missions that you're actually planning. What does it mean? Well, you might fly a few times within the United States, and you might have 4 international trips with a very long haul. So we would then allocate part of the 135 hours onto the Global Express fleet. Maybe we give you 40 hours on the Global Express, again, totally to your needs, and the others on the Super Mid airplane. So we're really tailoring it to exactly the need you have, and that for corporations is extremely attractive because they don't feel like they have to take what is available, but rather tailored to exactly their needs.
And the price point, say, of flying overseas is different from domestic?
No, the price per hour is more or less the same. There might be surcharges if you land in China or in India that are significantly higher than the landing costs in New York or Miami, but it's fractionally slightly more expensive. But other than that, it's a fixed hourly rate. And
what is it approximately?
Well, it could be, of course, first of all, it's different per aircraft type, size, etc. But I think as a rule of thumb, it's probably somewhere between $10,000 and $25,000 an hour.
Right. And that makes good economic sense for people who travel a lot, people who are wealthy, companies, and whose executives' time is very valuable.
Well, and think about it. If your alternative is to buy an aircraft, a full aircraft, you carry the entire infrastructure cost, the capital cost, the pilots, the back office. You're carrying over the number of hours you fly. Even if you fly 300 or 400 hours per year, we are flying these airplanes, especially ultra long-range airplanes, up to 1,500 hours. So our cost point per hour is significantly lower. Part of it we can pass on to our clients. The other part is the profitability of the company.
And how is business going? I mean, you've got some headwinds in terms of, higher interest rates. You've got this globalization thing that seems to be going backwards. How do you see it?
Well, look, I mean, first of all, the company continues to grow. We continue to take market share. We just had our earnings call, the Q2 earnings call. Again, we offered and we reported significantly growth in the company on a global scale on every single continent. Geopolitically, of course, we have certain war situations. We have interruptions. We had last couple of months the situation in Israel, and when some days you can fly in, on other days you can't. So it's very tailored to the situation. Obviously, Russia, Ukraine is an absolute no-go, and I think that's part of operating a global business. But the client base that we have, the kind of like when they need to go, they need to go, and so they're waiting for the right window. We had this specifically with Tel Aviv over the last 6 to 8 months, where they might be standby, saying, "Okay, let's wait until it's safe to fly in and fly back out." So that's in general a headwind, but our clients still fly. They just wait for the right window. I think interest rates are not really of a concern to us. We have long-term finance contracts in place, and we have unsecured bonds in our capital stack, and our cost of funding is very, very attractive to us as a company with obviously a capital-intensive business, needs to carry a balance sheet with a significant amount of airplanes. But we don't see the cost pressure from that side. I think the cost pressures in a post-COVID world came from spare parts, from supply chains that were interrupted, and at times you just couldn't get your hands on certain spare parts, and airplanes were down. But most of that is really back to normality. But there were years in 22 and 23 when it was challenging to get spare parts for airplanes. And I always said, how can a $75 million factory be closed for a $5,000 part missing?
Mm-hmm, right.
But that's the way you had to think about this. So, but it has very much normalized, and so that is kind of like behind us.
You mentioned leverage. I mean, the company does have a fair amount of leverage on its balance sheet, and it's not profitable on a GAAP basis, net income. Are those things you plan to address going forward, or can the company sustain based on those levels right now?
The company is absolutely cash flow positive, so we're not in a situation where we need to raise capital to continue the business. I think if you look at the GAAP net income, it's an endless discussion around your depreciation policy, and that is an accounting decision you take or you adapt. All our stakeholders, neither the bondholders nor the shareholders, give us any pressure whatsoever to have a net income figure to a certain target. It's really EBITDA and the cash flow generation of the company that's driving the KPIs, and it's to that extent how we manage the company.
And going back to the traffic and where you fly, is the bulk of the business in the United States and North America? And I understand you're flying to KSA, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, more and more. What are the growth areas and what are the strongest areas?
Well, the strongest area is right here in America. We are now a very significant established player in the United States, Vista US. Half of our revenue is in America, which makes us very proud. If you ask me later on of what one of my mistakes were, I came too late to America. I only came here in 2014, 15, and there were established players. There still are here, but to become successful in this country as a foreigner, not easy. But here we are, 10 years later, and we have half of our fleet we have 120, 125 airplanes in this country. Growth areas, definitely emerging markets is a hotspot. This is where we are very good. Middle East is growing extremely strong. And you mentioned Saudi Arabia. We were awarded last week for the first internal flying license, the right to operate within Saudi. Very proud of that. It was a long process of being vetted, looked at in great details whether we can actually live up to the standards, and that is certainly a very, very significant market. And when you look at the change in the kingdom under the leadership of how much the market is opening up and wanting the best product in the country, then it's very much along the lines. And so we're very excited about this collaboration.
And what about revenues and customers? What are annual revenues at this point, Thomas, and how many customers do you have? How do you measure that then?
Well, we're at about $3 billion of revenue. The number of customers, we cannot mix up with the number of passengers because, of course, that's a completely different figure. But think about it, that there are approximately 1,500 what we call program members, okay? And that figure is growing significantly every year. So the portion of our revenue that is created by our long-term subscription members is very high, okay? And then we have other members which are not signing up for 3-year agreements. Those are kind of like members that give a certain deposit and then can fly wherever they want around the world, but more on an on-demand basis. So I think all in, if you bring the two groups together, you're looking at about 5,000 permanent clients that are rebooking with us. But of course, the number of clients that actually fly with us, because we also have an on-demand product, is a multiple of the 5,000.
The Wall Street Journal noted that you have sort of a complex structure when it comes to buying aircraft. Why do you have that sort of way of buying aircraft?
Well, it's a thing way from the past, okay? Mm-hmm. The simple fact is, me as an entrepreneur, I had a big vision. I saw that this market was way underserved with the best quality product. I always make this example, when you book the presidential suite of the Four Seasons or Peninsula, it sets you back $20,000, but you have it for 24 hours. With us, you might be paying it on an ultra long range jet per hour. So I always say, we got to be 24 times better than the presidential suite. And I had a vision in 2012 that this business could really be taken from what was a European Middle Eastern business to a truly global business. The company's revenue at the time, I think they were something like 300 million. And how could I ever place an order for, I think at the time it was close to $5 billion. How could I ever place an order of that magnitude with a company of 300 million revenue? So I took the order myself. I owned the company 100%, and everything was disclosed. And then, of course, the Wall Street Journal referred to related party transaction. And once the company grew into the vision that I had, eventually, I brought in another shareholder, a wonderful company based here in New York, Roan Capital, and everything was disclosed to the nth degree. And then there is a transfer pricing which needs to match the principle of market price. I myself never had a vote in this pricing between the company and myself to obviously be neutral on it, and that's what they were referring to. But there was a fair amount of populism around this discussion rather than sticking with the facts.
How do you're talking about growing in the United States and the growth that you got here. When you're going into a corporate suite and you're saying, okay, I know there's Warren Buffett's little company over here, but we're here. Mm-hmm. And so what is the value proposition? How are you selling against, for instance, NetJets or other competitors in the United States?
Sure. I mean, they're all great companies. We respect them a lot. I think big corporates, one of the things we do is we invite them to come to our operations center, do due diligence on us. I think our biggest selling tool is asking them for due diligence on how we run the business, and usually they're absolutely blown away by the actual quality of operation, by all the safety standards we put in place. We just announced a certain new method of how we do actually training of the pilots and the infrastructure, et cetera. And then, of course, they're looking at the economics. And while buying a fraction of an airplane might initially look as a interesting, proposition, I make it very simple. If you buy an airplane at 20 million and you sell the shares at 28 million, then right out of the gate, on the share you buy, you lose 25 or 30%. And then on the way out, when you want to sell the share of your fractional company, you can only sell it back to the company that you bought it from. I personally have a problem with that. I'm an asset finance guy. I very much value the flexibility of an asset market, of a fungible product. And if I can only sell to one party, I feel stuck. And if you make the calculation after 3 or 5 years of what that fraction really depreciated, and you add it back into the hours that you bought, and more often than not, you will have a significant surprise, which financially puts you at a disadvantage over our hourly rate. So the simple answer is great due diligence on our operational excellence, as well as the financial advantage in a lower hourly rate.
I want to ask about you just a little bit. You're Swiss, and you're also a race car driver, right? Tell us about that part of your life.
Well, I'm a passionate sports person. I used to play tennis. As a student, I ran field and track, 800 meters, and motorsport always excited me. And eventually, I started in local championships, and maybe in Italy. Switzerland doesn't have much or any motorsport, and eventually we were quite good, and we made it to the European Championship. We came second in that, and that allowed me eventually to participate in the World Championship, which is called World Endurance Championship, WEC. the FIA, which is obviously the governing body for Formula One and for World Endurance Championship, and that's a series which brings me to basically 4 out of the 5 continents. This weekend we're racing in Austin in Circuit of the Americas.
In which city?
In Austin.
In Austin, Texas.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
So-
and you're part of Ferrari?
I'm part of
Team Ferrari?
Yeah, so the World Endurance Championship has 2 categories.
Right.
One is hypercar, the other one GT. We're racing in the GT, and each manufacturer, it's basically a manufacturer world championship, and each manufacturer has 2 cars, and so we're the 2 official cars in the Ferrari World Endurance Championship.
And final question, Thomas. What do you think the future of private aviation looks like? What does this business look like 5, 10 years from now?
Well, look, the main driver of this industry is really the time efficiencies of the C-suite of the people are leading industries. They're leading there might be sports people, there might be physicians, there might be the best of their respective environment. And in today's world, time becomes more and more and more important on how you actually manage your time. And business jets just give you that extra flexibility, that extra time saving, that arriving at the destination in the most healthy and comfortable way, and maximizing your own capabilities. And I think that trend has a long runway of still in public appearance to actually be something very, very good, because we're bringing more efficiency out of the same leaders than we have today. So I see the market is usually being judged as growing at double GDP. So if GDP grows at 3, this market would grow 6-7%. And if you then deep dive into this market, the global scale of it will only continue to expand into every single continent. The U.S. today is, of course, leading this industry. If we look at trends, just like we saw in the Middle East with the Saudi opening, etc., I think the concept of business jets will be significantly more popular in some regions in the world. For example, India, we now have a fully fledged operation within India. There's 1.4 billion people. And then ultimately, my vision is that the archaic concept of owning a jet rather than just using it in the most efficient way is the trend that will succeed, and hence we're laser focused exactly on this business model, because at the end the customers are voting with their wallet. They're saying, okay, who do we give the money to? And more often than not, it's Vista.
Thomas Flohr, Chairman and Founder of Vista, thank you so much for joining us.
Great seeing you. Thanks for having me.
This is at Barrons. I'm Andy Serwer. We'll check you next time.